to Girard at Large with your guest host, Hal Shurtleff, and I'm here with Ed Nail of the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. And on the line is Alex Newman. Hey, Alex, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Thank you for getting up a little bit. I know you were in Montana at what's it, the Red Pill Convention or Red Pill seminar or conference, and you're still on.
Right. Yeah. The Red Pill Expo in Bozeman. So my mind is still on Montana time, 2 hours earlier than East Coast time. But no, it's great to be with you, Hal. Thank you.
Well, Alex is going to also be at Camp Constitution. He's going to be just going to come in for like a day and a half. So I really appreciate you coming in. Now, Alex is a writer for the New American magazine, also for WorldNet Daily, and you speak a whole bunch of languages. You've traveled around the world. You were at the Paris Accords back a couple of years ago as a reporter for the New American, and you also are the co-author of Crimes of the Educators, which is the last book that Sam Blumenfeld wrote. Sam, of course, is a dear friend of ours, and I mentioned the Sam Blumenfeld archives. Ed was we were talking about Sam off the air, and he mentioned that he heard Sam speak some years ago in Keene. And Ed, anecdote you have was
he was giving a little talk on education at the library in Keene, and I was invited, so I go out, plop myself down. It was mostly teachers, and we had a guy that was running the show who eventually wound up being our school superintendent, a complete phony, and he went on about they were talking about education and the classroom itself, and Sam mentioned, well, these days you have a gerbil cage in one corner, you have things taped to the wall, the ceiling, it's like you're being inside of a kaleidoscope, and how can people learn like that? He said you need structure, you need the kids to look straight ahead, and he said when I went to school we had a half-finished painting of Washington, a painting of Lincoln, and ABCD, the alphabet was in cursive on the wall in the front. And one of the people said, well, that's the kind of education the Nazis used on their kids. And Sam says, that's the kind of education the people that beat the Nazis used. There you go. I love this guy.
So, Alex, tell us the Crimes of the Educators. That's a very tough name for a book. So tell us, who are these educators and why would you consider them to be criminals?
Well, we really mean that literally, right? And it's not hyperbole and it's not a figure of speech, but we're really talking about the education establishment. So, not your average teacher in the classroom. I mean, Sam used to say all the time, they're just as much victims as poor children. So the education establishment is really, the people who set the policies, the people responsible for the quack pedagogy that goes on in the classroom. For example, the teaching of reading using the whole word method. Sam used to call that the thalidomide of the brain, right? Because the source of the illiteracy crisis in this country. And so we actually list a whole set of crimes that the education establishment is perpetrating against American children, against the American people, in the book. And we start with, the first and most serious is, of course, treason. And that sounds like a very serious charge. But, when you realize that the people who designed the current education system that we live under, they had in mind the overthrow of our constitutional republic and the replacement of our system of government with a new system of government, and really it was a socialist, humanist, godless type of government, and the people who designed it were not afraid to say so. If you go back to John Dewey, he was very clear about his intentions. He wanted to, he thought America was too individualistic and capitalistic and too Christian, and so he wanted to use the schools to get rid of that and to move us towards socialism. Actually, he pointed to a novel by Edward Bellamy, published in 1888, called Looking Backward. It was about a communist America in the year 2000 with no private property, and he thought that was the model. And, for people who don't know much about John Dewey, he was a very open socialist. He went over to the USSR to see what Lenin was up to and thought, oh, this is nice. He was one of the drafters and signers of the first Humanist Manifesto, and I think that reveals his ideology pretty clearly, right? I mean, the very first line is, we think the universe is eternally self-existing and not created. They talk about getting rid of private property, getting rid of the nation state, sharing wealth equally, right? Might as well come from Fidel Castro or Mao Zedong. And so we argue that that's treason. Yeah, and in 1983, the Ronald Reagan administration, they had their National Commission on Excellence in Education. They said that if a hostile foreign power had imposed this education system on us, we might have considered it an act of war. And, we argue that just because John Dewey and his cohorts were not a foreign power, that doesn't mean that, it's any less an act of war or an act of treason, as the case may be. And then we have a whole list of other crimes, child abuse, promoting the delinquency of a minor, extortion and fraud. You basically have, these government schools who are being told that, hey, you give us money, you give us your children, and we'll educate your children, and actually we're getting the opposite of that, right? Where the schools are literally dumbing down our children, and, if any other good or service, you would definitely, take those people to court. You would say, hey, you said the good or service was going to do this, they actually did the opposite, and so that's fraud. And yet we have government schools doing that in this country every day, all year round.
We have at the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers, we printed up a bumper sticker. Remember, they were very popular at one time. We printed over 1,000 of these things called "It takes a school to bankrupt a village." And I'll tell you, boy, they went like hotcakes. Grover Norquist had one in his office when I went down there one time.
Really?
Pinned up, yeah. And occasionally, I was going to the airport one time, and I saw one on a car down by the Boston airport. It takes a school to bankrupt a village, and it encapsulates a lot of what people that see this for what it is, into bumper sticker mentality. The cost of some of these towns in New Hampshire, 80% of your taxes, your property taxes, go to the school, and when you see what comes out,
well, what's interesting,
you do a little bit of investigation.
You can drive through a poor town, for example, Vermont is. You see the barns falling apart. The farms are dilapidated. But that school is brand new.
Yeah, with a lot of extras and stuff.
That's right. So
with a diminishing population.
Exactly. That's right. Well, Alex, you've written about Common Core as well. I think your book came out. That book came out just a few years ago. So Common Core was a real hot button issue. It still is. How does the Common Core? Isn't that going to solve all the problems? That's going to solve all these educational problems, the bad literacy,
like Mathland did.
Right. Well, I started writing on Common Core. I started exposing Common Core probably around 2010, 2011, long before it was, known across the nation. They had already started it. They had already started actually working on forcing it on the states. The Obama administration was using bribes from the stimulus pot of money, and of course coercion and threats, and we're not going to give you a waiver from No Child Left Behind if you don't impose this on your kids. But it is absolutely not going to fix these problems. In fact, it's going to make them much worse. It institutionalizes them nationally, which is an unprecedented evil in this country. And let me give you just one example. Sam's big issue was the literacy, and I can see why, right? It's so fundamental. If a child can read, they can educate themselves no matter how much dumbing down the schools do. But if a child is unable to read, they need to rely on their government school teachers and on the television, which we all know is loves to promote fake news and wickedness and immorality and so on. So it's a bad situation. And now what Common Core does, it institutionalizes this quack learning method, the whole word, the sight word, the look-say, whatever you want to call it, across the nation. So you have these little kindergartners under the Common Core memorizing sight words. And, this does incredible damage to the brain. It builds these reflexes in the brains of these young children that will handicap them for life. And, in the Common Core, they do come to phonics in elementary school. And so tell a Common Core supporter, hey, there's no phonics. They say, oh, there's phonics. That's not true. But it comes after you've already done all the damage to the child's brain. So, this is just institutionalizing this quackery on a national scale. And it gets worse from there. The only two subject matter experts that they put on the Common Core Validation Committee refused to sign off on this. Mm-hmm. I've talked to both of them. They're very nice.
Sandra
but presumably
Stotsky.
They were chosen. Sorry?
Sandra Stotsky was one of them.
Right, exactly. Dr. Sandra Stotsky was in charge of the ELA, and she has a long history in Massachusetts. She helped develop some of the standards there, and so she's very well known. She was down at the University of Arkansas, and she said, I'm not going to sign off on this. This is going to reduce the critical thinking abilities of children. We're taking out all the great literature and we're replacing it with like executive orders from Obama and EPA regulations. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to sign off on this.
I tell you what, if I had to learn how to read by reading government manuals, I would have been a totally functionally illiterate. Because who wants to read government manuals?
I know, and if you look at the math, Dr. James Milgram of Stanford University, a mathematician there, he said, I'm not going to sign off on this. Some of this is based on incorrect math. You've got to be kidding me. And so they're institutionalizing this across the country. It's going to accelerate the dumbing down. And, it's important for people to understand Common Core is not the root of all evil, right? This is not anything new. This is really just the next step in a process that's been going on for more than 100 years now, involving the deliberate, the systematic dumbing down of American children in these institutions that we call public schools.
Well, I was at a homeschool convention with information table not too long ago, and I had some information. It was Duke Pesta, a colleague of yours and a friend of mine and a former colleague of mine, and he had an article on the topic. So I'm asking one of the parent lady came by and I said, do you know anything about Common Core? She says, well, that's why I homeschool. So we got 2 minutes left. Let's sort of wrap things up. But where can people get a copy of this book? Of course, you go Amazon everywhere. Everything is Amazon, but also WorldNet Daily has it available. Yeah,
right. There's I don't know if there's any signed copies left, but Sam and I autographed a few thousand of them, and they were selling them only through the WND Superstore, and that's available at superstore.wnd.com. If you come to Camp Constitution, I'm going to bring up a few copies. I'd be happy to sign one for you and sell it pretty close to cost. And other than that, you can get it just about anywhere online. I know Walmart had it through its online portal. All the big retailers were carrying it. So,
can I just say something? A lot of people now are having their eyes opened with what's going on with the government and the deep state and whatnot. And they're always asking me, how do you know what you know, Ed? I've been at this for a long time. A lot of times, get your hands on something like this.
That's
right.
We're
having some great speakers on today, some guests, and they've all written books. And get your hands on something like this. And just take anything. If you're interested in education, get a hold of a book like this and read it, and you've got your toe in the door.
Well, I have an autographed copy that Sam gave me, and I haven't got your autograph, so I'm going to bring it to camp with me so I get your autograph on it as too. It's interesting, too. Sam, a number of years ago, Sam Blumenfeld said that he's going to do this till he drops. I mean, he's not going